So before getting stuck into this subject, I just want to do a kind of a foreword to this video and just quickly point out what this video is not about. Now, this video is definitely not about diet or whether we should be consuming raw dairy or not, because that kind of question is really a very subjective question, and it's dependent on so many different variables that are really never the same from one person to the next. So, some people will tend to do better than others without any animal foods, whereas, many people do extremely badly on a long-term plant-based diet. So, really the issue that's being raised in this video is definitely not dealing with what we should or shouldn't be eating at all. And if the comments underneath this video get littered with really polarized, argumentative comments that are in support of dogma on either end of the scale, then personally I'm not going to be participating in that, and I won't be really responding to any of that, because that really is not at all the topic of this video. This video is also not about mainstream dairy produce and the consumption of mainstream dairy produce, because factory farmed, non-organic, grain-fed, pasteurized milk, that is really not something that I would be recommending for anyone, under any conditions. So when I'm referring to milk and dairy products in this video, I'm referring to local, grass-fed, organic or biodynamic raw dairy exclusively. Now, something else that this video is definitely not about is the health benefits of milk. Now, there are some very real health benefits that you can access from consuming very high-grade raw dairy. Some people are obviously going to benefit from that more than others, but personally, for myself, I've really found that biodynamic, local, raw dairy products, specifically fermented raw dairy products, have actually been something that's done me the world of good. Now, I'm not suggesting that that is going to be the case for everybody, because it really isn't, but for me, fermented raw dairy has been a really integral aspect of my health journey, and so I'm not at all opposed to, as I said, local, really good quality, organic or biodynamic raw dairy. But really what I wanted to do with this video is just point out that there are some very genuine problems that are surrounding the production of even the most high quality, sustainable and pure commercial raw dairy products. And these are issues that I've seldom seen discussed within current health circles. So from my own perspective, I'm really not attached to any diet or any single way of doing things, of doing anything permanently, and I just think it's really important that when we are following a particular path or a particular system or a particular whatever, that we remain open-minded enough that we allow ourselves to explore the many dimensions of that path or of that system, and we can see how it can be improved or how we can evolve it potentially if necessary. So with all of that said, we should really start by just looking at how often cows are impregnated. Now, pretty much all species of cow within the dairy industry will get artificially inseminated and give birth to a new calf once every year. Now, all cows can normally produce milk for up to 2 years after giving birth, but they're still made to have a new calf every year so that the farms can ensure that the milk production doesn't dry up and it remains consistent. Now, there are other reasons why dairy cows have a new calf every year, but I'll get to that in a moment. Now, a lot of the larger scale farms really don't give the cows a break from milking, and they just milk them continuously all throughout the year. Although there are also a lot of other farms that do allow the cows a kind of drying off period for the last month or two of their pregnancy before giving birth, so they stop milking them a month or two before the calf is due to be born. But when the calf is born, at that point milking will resume. So even on really small scale ethical dairy farms, cows are still milked for at least 300 days of the year. Now the gestation period for cows is really very similar and much the same as it is for humans. It's about 9 months, which invariably means that quite a lot of the milk that's being taken from any dairy cow throughout the year is actually being taken while it's still pregnant. And this is where things start to get a little bit complicated, because obviously the production of estrogen hormones is going to be dramatically higher in pregnant cows than it is in non-pregnant cows, especially after the first couple of months of gestation. And the presence of these hormones in the milk actually continues to increase throughout the pregnancy right up until the calf is born. So the later in the pregnancy that the milk is taken, the more estrogen hormones it's going to have in it. Now, elevated levels of estrogen hormones in the body is very closely correlated to the creation and exacerbation of a number of different reproductive cancers in both men and women, and in younger children it can really interfere with proper gender development, amongst other things. So of course all of this applies to the mainstream dairy industry, but really my point is that these kind of annual gestation and milking cycles are still very much prevalent in even the most small scale and seemingly sustainable commercial dairy farms. So even if we're consuming really, good quality, local, grass-fed, organic, raw dairy, all of this is still very much a reality. Now, when we look at the many thousands of years of ancestral use of dairy and how beneficial that was as a staple food in many cultures, we can see that grass-fed and raw are really only a couple of criteria that many of our ancestors employed in order to really obtain the many health benefits of consuming raw dairy. Now, something else that they did was to do things on either just a family scale, so they were just providing for their family, or to do things on such a small scale that they were only really catering for their immediate community and not beyond that. And so really the herds that were, in existence at that time were really never, ever expanding to meet the demands of a growing population of dependent people. When we look at the traditional yak herders in places like Mongolia and Tibet, if we look at them as an example, we can see that artificial insemination was not even an option for them. And, they would only really milk the yak for a few months of the year, maybe up to 5 months of the year, and they'd only ever milk them into the very early initial stages of a pregnancy. And a lot of the milk that they would be collecting would actually be fermented and preserved so that it could get them through the times of year that the herd were resting and that they were not being milked. And this was a practice that was done by people who relied upon this raw dairy for survival. There really wasn't much else that they could grow, and so they were very, very dependent upon animal foods and upon dairy. So really the vast assortment of health benefits that are associated with raw dairy were made available to people like this without them having to expose themselves to, potentially harmful amounts of animal reproductive hormones, and without needing to manipulate natural cycles in any way. Another huge reason why modern dairy cows are routinely impregnated every year is so that they can obviously have new calves, but not only for producing more milk. The calves are also used as a resource in the sense that the males will largely all be sent to the meat industry, and the females are either going to stay on as milk producers, or they may be sold to other farms, and some of them will quite possibly be used for meat as well. Now, the selling off of young calves is actually a very, very important income for pretty much all dairy farms. And so, it's unavoidably a large reason why the cows are made to produce new offspring on an annual basis, and why a lot of the milk is being collected and sold while the cows are in the second and even third trimester of their pregnancy, which is, as we've seen, a time when bovine estrogen hormones are increasing massively. So there really is a genuine risk of exposing ourselves to excessive amounts of these reproductive hormones if we're drinking milk and consuming dairy, even local raw dairy, on a very regular basis all throughout the year. And everything that I've just mentioned really pervades all aspects of the dairy industry, even down to these little family farms that have very high ethical standards, So it's really very rare, actually, to find anyone at all that's running a commercial dairy farm who is not conforming to this kind of protocol, simply because, in a competitive market, these procedures have really become commonplace and really actually necessary in order for farms to survive. Another very real point to consider, in my opinion, is that in almost every case, the calves are being sold off after just a couple of weeks of being born, which is a really incredibly stressful experience because they will have just formed a very deep bond with their mother. And I've witnessed firsthand the mother cows literally just crying out all day and all through the night because they've just had their calf taken off them at such a young age. Now, many of these cows actually refuse to eat, and they just completely emotionally just shut down and go into a state of shock, really. And so, being put into this kind of emotional state on an annual basis, it just cannot be enriching the nourishing and healing potential of the milk. And it's a real clear sign of a genuine imbalance, because cows are not being respected and revered in the way that they were by our ancestors, and they're just having this undue stress placed upon them because of heavy economic demands. Now, my local biodynamic dairy farm made a commitment last year to actually let the calves stay with their mothers for 4 months before being sold on, which is something that nobody does at all. And the herd and the farm in general, the whole well-being of the farm really benefited in so many ways from doing that. I mean, they obviously had a lot less milk for sale during that time, but the overall well-being of the herd, and it was just elevated to such a degree, and the calves were really allowed to develop and mature to a point where the mothers felt actually much more able to let go of them, when the time came. So the process of actually selling the calves on was actually a much smoother transition when it was done in this way. But, whether that farm continues to prioritize the needs of the herd, in favor of financial gain, remains to be seen, because it's really dependent on a number of different factors. But it has been very, very successful so far, and customers have been very, very supportive because they've just totally embraced it, and they've totally embraced the decrease in milk that's available for them to buy, simply because they could see from visiting the farm how much more sustainable this was, and how much happier the animals were, and how much happier the whole vibe at the farm was. And this also led the farm to, unavoidably shorten its outreach to people and really start to aim to supply only the local community and really nothing more than that. Now, obviously, the human population is so much bigger than it was a very long time ago, and there are now a lot of people that really want access to good quality dairy produce. But there's so many of us now that, everybody keeping their own livestock and providing for their own family is really not a realistic solution for everybody at all. I mean, it's obviously ideal if you have land or you have a small holding or something like that. If you can do it, then obviously that's a really good option. But there's just so many people now and such a decrease in available land that, you know, people are just unable to provide this service for themselves, and so they are largely dependent on farms. So really, where does that leave us? Well, firstly, I think it means that in the current model of farming livestock, even the most natural and ethical farms are really bound to a completely unsustainable and really very unrealistic system that not only neglects some of the most basic requirements for keeping a healthy and balanced herd, but it also, you know, it unavoidably results in the cutting of corners just to maximize on production, which obviously ends with, you know, potentially unfavorable health consequences for those of us that are actually consuming raw dairy. So considering that farming livestock is really not going anywhere, it's really very important that we all try to interface with ethical farming as much as we can and really drive it towards progress, because farming is currently driven just by economic demand, which is really what's created all of this mess in the first place. So, you know, only by reducing demand can we really begin to migrate towards a more seasonal and sustainable farming practice, which, you know, is much like that of our ancestors. And that really means that, you know, we need to consume dairy more seasonally, and really to stop treating it as our birthright to just consume as much of it as we can get our hands on, you know, as often as possible. And, you know, it also means that a lot more small-scale farms really need to appear in order to provide just for their local communities, with no ambition to expand any further than that. And this is going to be a lot more difficult in urban areas, but, you know, relocalizing and connecting more with the immediate natural environment and the animals that are actually providing all of this food to us is really, it's essential in bringing about any kind of lasting change that's actually going to have a positive impact on the ecosystem and on the livestock and on the health of people that are actually consuming these animal foods. Because in dairy farming, if the herd is actually kept small enough that it can only really supply dairy produce to the local villagers, then there really wouldn't be such a need for over milking, and the cows would actually be given a lot longer to rest, and they'd have some time off from the, you know, the strenuous milking cycle, and so we would actually avoid all of the negative health impacts that really come with all of that. And if the meat industry, and again that, you know, it includes organic and grass-fed meats, if the meat industry would actually produce a lot less meat and relocalize in this way and aim at only supplying the immediate community, then it would also place a lot less pressure on the dairy industry for constantly having to, you know, produce new calves on an annual basis. And so there would be a lot less strain, you know, that a lot of strain would become very much alleviated in all areas of the farming practice. Because, you know, the meat and the dairy industries are really tightly interwoven in a big way. And, you know, the meat industry obviously has its own issues with ethics and sustainability. But my point here is really that, you know, the small-scale family farming scenarios really do still have quite a way to go before they're operating in a way that is truly, you know, harmonious with all of the elements of an interconnected ecology. So we can really get started with all of this by just only consuming local raw milk when the cows are either not pregnant at all, or while they're still in really the first trimester of their pregnancy, which is something that you're only going to know if you visit the farm and if you talk with the farmer and you let him or her know your reasons for actually asking these questions. Now, another very important element to visiting your local dairy farm is that you can actually spend time with the cows, because cows are really very sociable animals and they really spend their entire lives just constantly giving. just giving way more than they should to people, and people just tend to not even acknowledge them at all. So it's really a very grounding and very healing experience to spend time communing with cows and connecting with them in this way, and connecting with them in a sense of gratitude. Because, you know, they are mothers, and they always have their children taken from them prematurely by people, yet they still provide so much milk for people. And, you know, it's really the least that we can do to improve the interconnection between us and them, and to really recognise how sacred cows actually are. So if we were to transition into lots and lots of little farms all over the place, providing just to their local communities, then it would be dramatically easier to conduct farming practices in a really low impact way, and really reduce the need for this profit-driven economy. I mean, really, you know, relocalizing to an intimate scale is really, in my opinion, a general rule that could be applied to just about anything and everything, and it should be applied to everything. But with dairy farming as an example, we can really see how all of the aspects of the industry really stand to benefit from such a change. And, you know, this kind of change is really not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen without our involvement either. Farming is not going to change from anybody's good intentions alone. So, you know, it's really, really critical that more people get more involved and really begin to communicate their views and their ideas with people that are running farms already, and also more people actually starting to run farms themselves in this kind of way that we're talking about. Now, realistically, it's only relatively small, raw, organic, biodynamic farms that are really going to be able to, or really even open to, downsizing and calving less and milking less. And, you know, so really in the initial stages of change, I really think that is the priority, to really get farms with already high standards to just make more improvements and really agree to network with other farms and really spread the demand for dairy across, you know, their local area with other farms. Because, you know, there really isn't much of a choice anymore, because we've really taken this approach to farming as far as it can realistically go before it implodes. So I think with more public involvement, then the transition process into relocalizing and more towards sustainability can really happen a lot more easily and a lot more smoothly. Now, nothing that I've talked about in this video is the result of me reading books or doing hours of internet research or anything like that. This is all from actual, real experience, you know, of spending a lot of time at my local farm and talking to the farmer about all of these things, and really learning a lot more about the darker side of the dairy industry that, you know, as I've repeated throughout this video, still very much applies to and really pervades even the best local dairy farms. Now, this is not at all the last time I'm going to visit this subject and other kind of interrelated subjects through YouTube videos, but I really just wanted to highlight the importance of really not getting too comfortable with the quality of our, you know, our grass-fed raw dairy, and really to try and establish the need really for relocalizing and really producing many more community farms that are really not driven by profit, but instead focus much more on nature, and really seeing ourselves as a real integral part of nature rather than just a dominant force or a parasite upon nature. Because as is very obvious for us to see, when we approach things in this way, you know, we really just end up damaging everything, which unavoidably ends in the destruction of ourselves.